As we know, in our particular culture, sharks have, or used to have, I think we can now say, somewhat bad reputation. And this goes back hundreds of years when sharks were depicted as man-eating monsters. And by and large, that image is still fairly alive and well. Although I feel that it has been changing over the last 5 to 10 years. And this event is an example of how the image of shark is being reframed and how we're now seeing them quite differently and probably more for what they really are. Now, to get this out of the way, how dangerous are sharks? In the US, for example, you're about 4 times as likely to be killed by a spontaneous sandhole collapse as you are by a shark bite. Dogs kill about 30 times the amount of people than sharks do. And people, actually, you're more likely to die from a bite of a person than you are from the bite of a dog, let alone a shark. So various so-called rare ways to die, and sharks being at the very bottom of the agenda. Bottom line is we have to have respect of sharks, but it's extremely unlikely that any of us, or anyone we know, or anyone we know who knows of someone, will actually be bitten by a shark. We talked about how people are perceiving sharks. Let's talk about how sharks are perceiving people. Well, they don't see people very much unless they're dead, and lots of them are dead. In fact, we're killing, according to research that we conducted at our lab, we're killing at least 100 million sharks per year. That's at least 6 or 7% of what is there. The problem is that sharks can only reproduce at a rate of 2, 3, 4, 5% a year. So we're killing more every year than can possibly, under the best possible conditions, can be reproduced. And as such, the populations are declining. It's as simple as that. And the odds of a shark being killed by a person rather than the other way around is 20 million to 1. And this is what it looks like. So those are mako sharks and other large sharks, blue sharks, and so on. This is an image from one fish market in Japan, not even one of the larger ones. And this goes on every single year, every single day, all around the year. This is where sharks end up. And they end up, to some extent, their meat is used from species like mako and some others, but a lot of sharks end up as shark fins. So shark fins is a luxury product. It's a traditional Chinese wedding banquet item. So it's used on very special occasions, maybe only once a year. But recently it's become more of a status symbol to show off wealth. And as wealth has been increasing in China and other parts of Asia, their demand has skyrocketed in the 1990s and 2000s. And that's a large reason why sharks now are in trouble. And this is what shark fin soup looks like. So I talked a little bit about the relationship we had with sharks, one of fear and maybe even hatred, and certainly indifference with respect to the large numbers of sharks being killed, sometimes only for their fins, or in many cases only for their fins, while the rest is discarded. But there's another relationship emerging, and that relationship really comes through people who actually go through the trouble of spending time with live sharks. And this is mostly recreational divers and then scientists and writers, as mentioned previously, people who go out to seek contact with sharks and see what that's like. And every single person I know who's tried that came back with a conviction that sharks were not only not a danger to them, but they were only among the most mysterious and wonderful wildlife they've ever encountered. And I see some people nodding here because they've had that experience, and it is transforming. So we can do that right here off Halifax, by the way. I teach a shark class every year, and we bring students out, and they see sharks sometimes for the first time in their life, just about 10 kilometers, 15 kilometers off Halifax. And they already are sympathetic to sharks, but once they really see them in their environment, it really does something to you. It's like seeing a bear for the first time, or maybe a moose or another large animal. It really is an amazing experience. And because of that, we have a rise in a different use, if you want to employ that term, of sharks in global shark ecotourism, mostly diving ecotourism, but some shark watching, such in South Africa, where people watch white sharks preying on seals. And here you see some global overview, and I circled Nova Scotia and Maritimes in red, and there was no operation there. Why? Not because we don't have any sharks. We have 20 species of sharks in our waters. Some populations are relatively healthy. It's not hard to find them. Why aren't we capitalizing on this? I was on the Azores in the middle of the Atlantic. This is here, and there is actually a dot here, because in the Azores, which is part of Europe, they're doing very well on shark diving ecotourism, and a single shark there can bring in as much as $10,000 a day in revenue from people going out to watch the shark and dive with the shark, interact with the shark. And obviously that's much more than is brought in by killing a shark and selling it. And so sharks are becoming increasingly better protected in that area and other areas around the world. So in this talk, I just want to briefly touch on 4 questions with respect to sharks. What makes them unique? How are they doing? How can their lot be improved? And what is the outlook for the future? Specifically, what every one of you can do. Okay, so the first question, why are sharks unique? Well, the most fascinating bit about them, in my view, is just how old they are. Sharks evolved some 400 million years ago. That's twice as old as dinosaurs. So they're the survivalists. They're the ones that made it all the way through from basically back in time when the first large creatures in the oceans evolved. No life on land at that time, by the way. That's when sharks started to rule. They've ruled ever since, up to now. So now we're taking 100 million sharks at least out of the ocean every year. What does that do to the ocean? Well, everything in the ocean has evolved with sharks in the picture. When you take sharks out of the picture, you know something's going to happen, because everything has adapted to sharks and sharks being present. Now, they are an ancient fish, but they have some vulnerability, because they are something like, I call them the version 1 fish. So they were the first attempt to make a fish, and it was a good attempt because it has made it all the way to today. But it has some weaknesses. They grow really slowly. They have few offspring. They're much like humans in just producing a few pups a year. And they're extremely vulnerable to fishing. The reason for this is that sharks never really have many other predators other than other sharks. And because of that, they never had to deal with excess mortality in any way. And now we're imposing excess mortality, and through 400 million years of evolution, they've never had that. So that's a problem, and they probably can't adapt fast enough to counter that. So here's just a plot I did on the age in millions of years of different families of fishes and other large predators, such as whales and seals and so on in the ocean, and then some of the genuses. And you see the sharks are way on top. So they've been around longer than tuna, longer than cod, longer than killer whales, longer than seals. Just to talk a little bit about the amazing diversity of sharks, there's about 500 species of sharks we know, and it's hard to believe, but we're discovering new species every year. Every single year there's a couple new species, 3-4 new species being found. Now, we certainly found the largest ones. This is the whale shark, which lives in the tropics. Very, very, very occasionally one is caught off Nova Scotia or seen off Nova Scotia. This is one in an aquarium down in Georgia. But we have our very own large shark, the second largest fish in the world. It's a basking shark, and people are actually studying it around Nova Scotia, particularly in the Bay of Fundy. They come into the same habitat that the right whales go, and they feed on plankton. So in a sense, it's a shark that's trying to be a whale, like the whale shark, right? They're filter feeders. They don't have teeth. They don't prey stuff or pursue stuff. But also there are some sharks that are very small. This is the dwarf longtime shark, and this is not a baby. This is how big they get, right? So you have this huge range. This is a deep water shark. You have this huge range of species adapting to everything from eating seals and other marine mammals to eating plankton. So they're incredibly adaptable, they're very diverse, and some of them are just plain odd. So for example, the goblin shark on the left hand actually has a protruding jaw. So this is when the jaw is protruded. This is unfortunately a dead animal, but there's footage of them. If you want to Google it on YouTube, goblin shark feeding, you can see a diver interacting with a goblin shark, and the goblin shark looks like a normal shark, and then this jaw jumps out and grabs the diver's arm. So they're pretty interesting looking sharks. Cookie cutter sharks it's a parasitic sharks. Who would have known that some sharks are parasites? And they actually, like leeches, they attach to other animal, marine animal, to their skin, and they quickly bite cookie-shaped pieces out of their skin and disappear. And you often see these lesions on other marine animals. So that's the cookie cutter shark. As I said, there's about 500 species, and again, until recently, we didn't really know where they lived. So 2 students of mine compiled all the information on where sharks live, all 500 species as far as we know. And you see they're not very evenly distributed. They tend to hug coastlines. There's fewer sharks out in the open waters. And a lot of them are concentrated in East Asia and Australia. This is where you get a lot of diversity of sharks. Unfortunately, this is also where they tend to be the most threatened. Now, closer to home, Atlantic Canada, what kinds of sharks do we have here? There's about 20 species of them. I'll just highlight a few that I find particularly fascinating. Porbeagle sharks, actually on the last shark swim, previous to last shark swim with the shark class, we saw a porbeagle shark. They're interesting because they're a cold water shark, and they have evolved countercurrent heat exchangers in their body to actually keep their body heat above ambient, unlike other fishes. They're like a bluefin tuna that way, very highly evolved, and as a result, in our cold waters, they're very effective predators. And when you see them, you see they're different because they're more twitchy, more nervous, they're faster moving, not dangerous to humans as far as we know. They tend to feed on small fish and squid and so on. But very interesting shark. By the way, a close relative to the white shark, although very different size and different way of living. In Germany, where I'm from, they're called the herring shark because they tend to feed on small fishes in contrast to the white shark. Then we have the spiny dogfish. Some sharks, actually a lot of sharks, are really small. And a lot of sharks like to live on the bottom. So they're almost like a cod. And in fact, when cod disappeared from large areas in a region, these spiny dogfish kind of filled their niche in some areas, such as Georges Bank in the United States. And there were a lot of them for a while. And people started fishing them. And because they're sharks and not cod or other bony fishes, they disappear very quickly once you start fishing them because they mature very late and it takes them a very long time to get going. Basking sharks, we talked about those. The shark that's trying to be a whale. We actually don't know how they're doing in our region, whether they're going up or down. They're certainly being caught, particularly in mackerel weirs and other fishing weirs. So there's a concern there. Sometimes in trawls they show up. And we don't know how many of them there are. We don't know where they're going in the winter, what happens to them there. Some of them are tracked to go off Brazil, so they're certainly world travelers, but very, very enigmatic species. And it's curious to me that this is the second largest fish we have anywhere, not just in Canada, and we know almost nothing about it. Greenland sharks, personal favorite of mine. They're a truly Canadian shark. They should be called the Canada shark because we have a lot of them, which is lovely, but it's also a problem because they're interfering a lot with emerging fisheries in the Arctic. And that's a huge problem right now that as the ice retreats, new fishing grounds open up, and people start fishing for things like turbot or Greenland halibut. And the Greenland sharks, they see the turbot dangling off the lines, immobile. They're carrion eaters, or so we think. And so they go and try to eat the turbot and get wrapped in the line and pulled up and killed. So, and this is a true cold water shark. They actually live in some cases under the ice. They're very slow moving, and we have no idea what their growth rate is or even their basic biology, but some calculations we've done suggest that they're they basically don't grow at all, or very, very, very slowly. So they may be ancient, but we don't know that because we can't age them. So again, a large, this is up to 4 or 5, in some cases maybe 6 meters in length, huge animals, fairly abundant in Canada, very little research on them. Okay, so that's sharks for you. So you start to appreciate them for the diversity and their resilience and all of that. But what is actually their population status right now? And the answer is uniformly not good. Not all populations are plummeting like this, but a lot of them are. This is actually data right from our region here. Various shark species, hammerheads, white shark, tiger shark, various coastal shark species, various pelagic species such as blue shark and oceanic whitetip and so on the bottom. And what you see universally is a decline in abundance because the rate of exploitation, as we showed for the entire world, is higher than what sharks actually can sustain. That's the basic problem. And you can go around the world. We've repeated these studies again and again in different places. The Mediterranean was particularly bad, where a lot of the kind of wonderful shark species, such as thresher sharks here, or makos, blues, hammerheads, disappeared to almost nothing. So in many places, 99, 99.9, 99.99% declines, meaning almost all gone. And the amazing thing about this is that this didn't really become a topic until the 2000s. This has been ongoing for decades and decades, but it really only became public knowledge or something that people really got concerned about when it was almost too late. So scientists started to compile, in a hurry, started to compile information on just how many shark species are actually threatened by extinction, meaning we could lose them in our lifetime or in our children's lifetime. So the threatened ones in these pie charts here are the one in the red color, so red, light red, and orange are the ones that are actually right now, as of today, threatened by extinction, meaning we could lose them for real. And as you can see in the Mediterranean, in the center pie chart, there are almost half of them. And then some areas like Australia, for example, here, less than a quarter. So roughly a quarter to half, depending on species, depending on where you are, tend to be threatened. That's a lot. That's more than birds, for example. It's about the same level of threat as for amphibians and primates, our closest relatives. So it's a huge concern, possibly the largest single species group concern we have in the ocean. But as Cameron, who's in the audience, tells me, their close cousins, skates and rays, are not far behind. But they receive less attention until now. So they may be the next group coming up where people are like, oh my God, what's happening here? Now, one really amazing fact about why sharks are threatened is not really because we want to kill them. In many cases, we want to kill them, but in even more cases, we're actually fishing for something else, and we're catching them as bycatch. So we're catching them unintentionally. As you see in the red bar there, it's a primary threat for most of the shark species that are listed by the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, which does the red lists, is bycatch. So I mean, we have to absorb that. This is a species group that's older than the dinosaurs. They're still around. There's 500 species of them, and a quarter to half of them are threatened, and we may lose them just because we're not smart enough to avoid them. That's what it comes down to, in many cases. Okay, so sharks are in trouble. All right, why is that a problem? I already talked about so many species being adapted to sharks because they've been around for such a long time. But what are the consequences? The answer is because the ocean is large and very highly connected, it's hard to trace these as they reverberate to the food webs. So the food webs tend to adjust in some way when sharks are lost. But how exactly does that happen? This is a study from Dalhousie which looks at the decline in large sharks off the US East Coast from actually surveys that were designed to measure the abundance of these species. And you see the same picture as in the Mediterranean. But what you also see that in the same surveys, some of the prey species are increasing in abundance, quite rapidly so. And then some of their prey species, such as the the bay scallop, which is eaten by a medium-sized ray called the cownose rays, which again is food for the large sharks, the bay scallop is declining in abundance. So we call this a trophic cascade, and it's just a tiny glimpse into what's happening in that we're losing some of the large sharks, and as such, things at lower trophic levels start to rearrange, sometimes in ways that hurt us. A lot of these consequences we don't understand yet. So we could describe this as collateral damage. We're fishing, we're doing other things in the ocean, and sharks disappear. And as a reason, we have these outbreaks in other species, and we may say, well, let's just change, right? And it is, in fact, a question of whether this collateral damage is worth it, whether we support this kind of action or inaction, or whether we oppose it. So the important bit of information here, though, is that if we oppose something, if we actually say collectively, this is not something we want to see happen, we don't want to see these sharks disappear, go the way of the dinosaurs, we can turn it around. How do we know this? Because we look at history. This work I did with my wife, Heike Lotze, and she's also at Dalhousie, and she looks way back in time, hundreds of years, thousands of years, compiling archaeological records, historical records, and looking at how species fared 500 years ago in this region, how they fare today, and what's the baseline, as she calls it, of where these species are coming from. And what you can see here is that a lot of species groups have declined a great deal over their baseline. So the numbers is decline from the baseline, 100% decline would mean all gone, 90% decline, mostly gone, and on average, these species declined about 89%, so almost 9 out of 10, gone over the past hundreds of years. And the good news, though, is that some species groups where we didn't approve of this trend and we initiated recovery actually start to recover quite nicely. Particularly marine mammals such as seals, otters, sirenians, which are sea cows and so on, and the whales, and also some seabirds start to recover. So they hit a low point maybe 100 years ago, and they're starting to recover now. They're still depleted over their baseline, but they're on the right track. They're increasing. I recently gave a similar seminar on the Azores when I was there, and that very day I dove with a baby sperm whale, which had just been born about 3-4 weeks prior. And this is like interacting with a human baby. It's no different. It's a little bit bigger. It's 4 meters, and it weighs a ton. But the kind of joy and curiosity and the touching and cuddling up to you and all of that is exactly the same. Because they're mammals. They're like us. And they're very social. They even have culture, right? Now, this experience I would not have had if 50 years ago people hadn't sat together and said, no, we're not letting whales go extinct, right? If we hadn't made that choice, and it was a simple choice, I wouldn't have had that experience, I wouldn't be here to tell you about it, right? That's the difference. Which brings me to solutions. And this is where the kids come in. So how can kids help? Well, I think that any change in the world starts with cultural and social change. And how do you change culture? It's really by changing and informing and educating and talking to and experiencing together with people who still have an open mind. And that's mostly kids. Sorry for everybody. So I think, no, not I think, I've experienced myself that education and outreach is actually the basis for everything. So sometimes, and sometimes you have your blinders on, and we scientists tend to do that sometimes because we focus on very particular issues. But sometimes I travel. Well, actually I travel quite a lot. And sometimes you have to go away to learn something that applies to home. So this image was taken in a place very far away. It's called Raja Ampat, and it's a part of Indonesia that's not very heavily settled. There's not a whole lot of people there. But it is the world pinnacle for biodiversity. There's more species of fish and coral in this beautiful region than anywhere else in the world. So the crazy thing was, this is the world treasure trove of marine species. unrivaled in the world. Nowhere else in the world do we have anything like this. And the people who actually lived there, the stewards of that treasure, did not know. They didn't know. They didn't have the information. So they didn't take the appropriate pride in their place. So what happened was that increasingly this was locked down by the military for a long time. And as that eased, foreigners came in, they saw the amazing beauty, and they said, you have something here that nobody else has. You know, and it's something maybe that's valuable to a lot of people, and something also you can live off by having people visit and show it and so on. And so it really changed the discussion. And the instrumental bit here was this boat, which was an educational boat that was funded by a bunch of non-governmental organizations who were interested in working with the people there. And it went from village to village, and it talked to the kids. And there was I actually was on this boat and saw what happened. There was a lot of singing, a lot of play, a lot of interaction, a lot of learning, and then in the very end of it, they got to dive and actually see what was there and have their minds blown. Because that happens to everyone who goes underwater in this area. So I actually went to Rajampat because of the biodiversity, but what impressed me more than that even was the change in the people and how enthusiastic and dedicated and concerned and proactive they were with respect to saving the marine environment. So when I came back, a bunch of us started an initiative called the Sharks of the Atlantic Research and Conservation Center, a coalition of shark. We put up a website that has all the information for sharks in this region. So you can go there and learn about all the different species, all the initiatives, the threats, the solutions, some conservation and management initiatives, and so on. So that's a tiny first step. And the next step for me personally was to dream up something that's still in very early stages, and it's called Ocean School. And then what it actually is it goes directly back to being on that boat in Rajampat. Only I can't be on a boat and go to every village in Canada. It would take a long time. So we do it through interactive technology. So touch screens, iPads, smart boards, which they have in many schools now, and provide real interactive content for kids to explore themselves, including games and citizen science projects like the one Christine devised that has told you about, videos that are playing. And the thing about this is it's not something on top of what they're already learning. They're actually learning their science curriculum through that ocean content. That's the basic idea. And this is a partnership our university has with the National Film Board. And this is a bunch of us in Cocos Island, which is actually one of the sharkiest places in the world. And the guy on the left is my neighbor, Paul McNeil, who's the producer from the National Film Board, who's doing this with us. And he had just learned diving, and he had never seen a shark. He actually had never seen a large animal in the water. And we go on our first dive here, and it was just a checkout dive, 10-meter depth, very mellow, nothing's happening, you know, little coral fishies swimming around. And then a 4.5-meter tiger shark shows up. We didn't know tiger sharks were there, or even in Cocos. They only showed up in recent years. And it was the first large animal I ever saw. But, and he was terrified before that may happen. As soon as that happened, he was okay. We saw, I don't know, hundreds of sharks during that trip. It was 10 days. He was never afraid one bit, because he had that direct experience. And you kind of understand when you're there. Okay, the second solution is protected areas. So this is again Rajampat, the so-called Bird's Head seascape, the peninsula and archipelago that has that pinnacle of biodiversity. Sharks were doing very poorly, by the way, because of shark finning in that area, typically done by foreign boats that would come in and poach the sharks. So the first thing was to get proper enforcement in place, and to get these protected areas where sharks and other marine life are fully protected. One interesting story about this is that this wasn't some scientist who dreamed that up. In fact, it was. A bunch of scientists sat together and dreamed this up, but at the same time, people who lived there were asked to say, what are the really critical areas here, the places we can't lose? So that was an important piece of information that science and local knowledge can really go together here. And just to show you why protected areas are important, This is a paper that just came out this year, a global synthesis of the abundance of sharks and other fish in the ocean. And the amazing thing about this map is that you can actually see, if you will, if you think of this as a from space view of Earth with the sharky areas highlighted, you can see large protected areas. You can see the Great Barrier Reef Marine Protected Area. Rajampat is here, not doing very well. You can see Cocos Island, the other red bit in the Pacific, where I just was, which is a national park. And you can see French Polynesia, where sharks have been protected for a long time. So, and those are really the three areas that light up in red. There's another area here, which is very well known among whale shark lovers, named Mingaloo Reef in West Australia. So you can actually see the effect of these protected areas from space with respect to sharks. How are we doing in Canada? Not so well with respect to protected areas. Less than 1% of our marine waters are protected here in the Maritimes. You can see the protected areas in red and green, federal and provincial areas, very few. You see that BC is doing somewhat better, particularly for provincial areas, but we are lagging far, far behind the goal that actually Canada subscribed to have 10% of its marine area protected by 2020, which is only 6 years from now. And we only have 1%. So we have to increase it tenfold. And if you look at the progress, it's so painfully slow, it's hardly measurable at all. And another thing that really concerns me and that I think more people need to know about is that a protected area doesn't equal full protection. In Canada, actually, right now, we're diluting the standards for marine protected areas to allow particularly oil and gas development in these areas, and in some cases also fishing and other activities. Particularly the oil and gas bit, obviously, is incompatible with the idea of protecting our marine wildlife. But the pressures are such that protected areas become vulnerable to these kinds of developments. Solution number 3, I told you that bycatch is the main problem for sharks, so we're catching them although we don't really want to catch them. So the first question here in Atlantic Canada, for example, is where are we catching sharks? Where are the hot spots? Where we're catching hundreds and hundreds of sharks in a single fishing line in some cases. And then other areas may be fine. So maybe we should compile that information and make it available. Here you see catch of poor-beagle shark, this interesting warm-blooded shark in our waters. He was caught a lot of longline fisheries. This analysis of a student of mine, Aurélie Gaudin. So something we tried is to put these shark deterrent devices onto the hook. You see that here. It's actually a rare earth metal that puts out electric field, and because the sharks have these electrosensory organs, they're sometimes repelled by this. It works in lab tests, and it works for very sensitive species such as hammerheads. Unfortunately, it didn't work for the sharks in our region, which disappointed us very much. So we need good ideas. Maybe somebody can come up with one. Think about the biology of sharks. What would keep them from eating that fish? I think this is a real, I gave a talk recently to business leaders, and I said, this is a business opportunity. If we could come up with a fishing gear that doesn't fish sharks, people would, rip this out of our hands. Because, as I said, the fishermen, by and large, they don't want to catch sharks either. The fourth solution comes back to each one of you. Consumer choice, obviously, is a very powerful and more powerful in today's highly connected world way of really changing the world by voting with your wallet, as they call it. You go to seafoodwatch.org, you download the seafood card, which I'm guessing a lot of you already have. If you don't have it, you look in it, you look for sharks. Sharks, all species, have a problem with mercury, which is also something that's highlighted here, and they're in the avoid category for their vulnerability. And then you have some best choices, some species you can eat without being concerned about a very large area and come into the long line. And if it's set for more than a few hours, you often have it full of sharks. In fact, very simple choice, like the choice to protect whales or not protect whales, but something that's really slowly changing the face of how we retail seafood in this country and really around the world. The more people do it, the more powerful this becomes. So to close my talk, if I convince you that sharks are important to keep around, what can you do? Well, first of all, there is still a demand for shark products, particularly, well, in some restaurants still serve it. It's worth, if you go to, say, an Asian restaurant, to ask whether shark fin soup is served. I personally have left some places because they still serve shark fin soup, to let them know that I don't condone that practice. There's a bunch of cosmetic products and in fact health supplements that contain shark cartilage or shark liver oil called squalene. If you see squalene on some of your products, that's a good idea to get rid of that and not buy it again. There's other things here. I went through Halifax to look for shark products. It pops up in amazing places. For example, on the trinket stores down on the waterfront, they're actually selling what do you call it? Bracelets and necklaces with shark teeth on them, and they're made in Indonesia, right where it traveled. Well, maybe not Raja Ampat, but somewhere in Indonesia, the shark was caught. So a tourist in Halifax who comes from somewhere else to Canada can have a shark bracelet of a shark that doesn't even live here. I went to the Discovery Center and found shark teeth in there was a set shark teeth as an educational thing. They said that they were replicas, but I did a little more research and I wasn't convinced, and they actually took it off the shelves. So in many cases, though, people who sold these products didn't really know. And so I think it's something, if you see this somewhere, just talk to people. In Hawaii, for example, you can buy shark jaws, you can buy all kinds of sharky things. Once you look for it, you find it in different places. It's important to speak out against. You can see Shark Water. Although I'm in it, it's a good film. And what you can also do, if you're so inclined and if you feel adventurous, if you don't dive, I highly recommend you try. I just went snorkeling 2 days ago. I actually did my CPC column on it yesterday, and I saw not a shark, but the largest electric ray in the world, which is the torpedo ray, Torpedo Novellana, which comes up to our waters in the summer. And there's 2 spots which they frequent here. And I was free diving down, and lo and behold, there was one. And I approached it to look whether it was alive because it was very motionless. And it actually was alive because it shocked me. It gave me a little jolt. And I thought that was an interesting conversation we had, so I disappeared. But you know, it's things like that. Like when we go out and tag sharks for research out to maybe just 10 miles of Halifax, it's a zoo out there. It's amazing what lives out there in terms of not just sharks, but other creatures such as large whales and sunfish and all kinds of rare birds you never see on the shore. And I just often think so few people get the chance to see this. So if you want to change this, as I said, there's lots of places you can go and dive with sharks and have that experience for yourself. And all in all, you know, every bit we can do helps, particularly for the kids. And thanks so much for listening.